MotoGP's two remaining title contenders, Pecco, Bagnaia and Jorge Martin, already spent a title battle last year, chucking points at each other, and that's kind of happening again. An enforced error from Bagnaia at Misano, 16 points left on the table, was followed by an enforced error by Martin at Mandalika in the sprint, 12 or 9 points left on the table. Simon in a Kuala Lumpur airport right now. Let's tackle this head on. Is this a title race between two butlers being covered by the 2024 Ducati and its supremacy, or is this just normal?
I'm pretty sure that there's other guys right now who are really, really angry that they don't have a GP24 Ducati because they think if they did, they'd be walking this title race. And I'm looking quite squarely at Marc Marquez at this point. We've seen incident after incident already this season. It goes back to Jorge Martin falling off in Jerez, and then Pecco Bagnaia tangling with Marc Marquez even before that in Portimao. Jorge Martin falling off in the Sachsenring. Jorge Martin getting his pit stop wrong at the first race in Misano. Pecco Bagnaia falling off at Misano. Pecco Bagnaia tangling with Alex Marquez and falling off at Aragon. It's getting harder and harder to defend these two guys whenever it keeps happening over and over again. I think really the only thing that works in their favour, the only thing that defends them here a little bit, is the fact that there is another rider on a GP24, Enea Bastianini, who should at least be in contention with them, but he's not managed to do that. They still have a very comfortable margin, and actually it was a mistake of his at the weekend at the Indonesian Grand Prix that essentially ruled him out of the title battle once and for all. So it's hard to put a finger in this. It's something that we've seen before. Fighting for championships is super high stress, and we've even seen Valentino Rossi crash out of a title lead where he should have won and threw it down the road at Valencia in 2006. So it's not like it's something completely unique to these guys, but it's looking more and more like it's something that they're making a speciality, considering we're now two title races in between the pair of them, where every title race has come down to who's going to make the least number of mistakes before the final race in Valencia.
As you've mentioned, obviously Bagnaia has had his tangles with the Marquez brothers, and also got sandwiched by Marco Bezzecchi and Brad Binder at one point, which was also an amount of points lost. Otherwise, if you exclude that, if you exclude various strategic errors, it's been 3 unforced crashes apiece for the two guys across 30 races, which, when you put it that way, doesn't sound terrible, but at the same time, again, when they're only fighting each other, it's bigger points lost or gained than in a head-to-head battle. So what's your feeling? Are they crashing too much? And you've heard both riders' explanations. Obviously, Pecco called it a championship of mistakes, so clearly they are aware of the perception. Are you buying the explanation offered for why it is the way it is?
There is one thing to bear in mind here. This is now going to be the longest MotoGP championship in history in terms of number of race weekends. We've doubled the number of races by adding the sprints to it, just to confuse things even more. So there is more potential for these guys to fall off than ever before, and that's part of it. The other element of it is that we're in an era of MotoGP where it's increasingly difficult to make overtakes because of the combination of ride height devices, aerodynamics, and the front tyre that doesn't like those two things. So overtakes become riskier, overtakes become more fraught with the possibility for error. And we've seen that over and over again, because essentially that's what happened Pecco Bagnaia against Alex Marquez. It is a tough time to be a MotoGP championship contender, probably tougher than it has ever been, because on top of all of that, the racing is also closer. This isn't Valentino Rossi's era of wins on the RC211 where he was able to just ease ahead of the pack, and there was a minute and a half separating the grid at the end of the race. Races are closer than ever. There's a bunch of absolute lunatics who are absolutely willing to get stuck into the title race on any possible occasion, as we saw at the weekend with Pecco Bagnaia's two best mates in the grid, Franco Morbidelli and Marco Bezzecchi, probably harming his championship battle a little bit by hindering him in the early part of the race. So it's a tough time to be one of these two guys. And I think that's probably, for me, the biggest mitigating factor whenever it comes to assessing whether or not this is, whether this is an outlier.
Simon, you mentioned 2006, and that is, of course, a season famously won by the late Nicky Hayden, who, in that whole season, retired from a race just once, and it was being wiped out by teammate Danny Pedrosa at Estoril. Every other time he was in the points, he was scoring points. That's ultimately what, got him over the line. People will look back at that sort of thing. They'll look back at, 2017, Marc Marquez versus Andrea Dovizioso. Marc crashed basically twice. Dovi only had one unaided crash, and it was in the season finale in desperation mode. And, you look at that, and there will be people who look at those people. They look at Mick Doohan, they look at Casey Stoner, and they'll go, why aren't these current guys like those guys? Why can I not trust them to finish a race? But is that rose-tinted glasses? Is that not really accurate of the current MotoGP reality?
I mean, that's a totally different era of the sport, and I think you're comparing apples to oranges whenever you look back to that. We're talking about the era of huge differences between factory bikes and satellite bikes. I mean, Jorge Martin would not have been fighting for a championship on a satellite Honda 500 two-stroke. Not a hope of it. We're talking about things like custom tires being made on a Friday night based on Friday's track conditions and Sunday's weather forecast. We're talking about huge disparities in terms of technical and financial resources across the teams in the grid that I think means that even as far as the Marc Marquez era, we're looking at a different stage of MotoGP right now. I mean, COVID changed things in the paddock. We came out of COVID in a different reality in terms of engineering, in terms of performance, and I think that we have to perhaps accept that this is the reality of title battles from now until at least the 800 or the new 850s arrive in 2027.
Yeah, and I think, three more things specific to, I'd say, Bagnaia and Martin to bring up. Factor number one, and it's what Bagnaia mentioned, the rear tire being much better than the front right now, overtaking the front technology, which means that it offers so much grip that sometimes it overpowers the front, and you see those Ducati guys, almost more than anybody else, have those very typical front tuck crashes. That, the second thing is they do seem to come out of nowhere a bit, and they do seem to confuse riders a bit, and that might just be a characteristic of the bike. It's so tuned up, it's so perfect, it doesn't really give you the feedback because it's never unstable, but then the second it's even a little bit unstable, well, it sends you to the ground. And then, of course, as a third thing, as you mentioned, it's the biggest, nerviest, longest calendar ever, and everyone is so tired. Let's look at two other people who are helping this title fight look better and will historically reflect it in a good light. We have Bastianini and Marc Marquez, who could also potentially be in the title race, but are now no longer really in it after this weekend. Obviously, Bastianini crashed on Sunday. Marquez's bike went up in flames, expired. They're now both over 70 points down. There's 175 still up for grabs, but it's over, isn't it? I mean, they're not a factor in this.
We're at the point now, whenever you look at their statistics, where essentially they need something catastrophic to happen to two other people in order to pull this championship race back, because you essentially need both Bagnaia and Martin to not score for 2 full weekends, and I think the odds of that happening while Marquez and Bastianini are in a position to capitalise on it, given the races that we've still got to come, there is a possibility that we're going to have some adverse conditions, that we're going to have some tricky circumstances. But the weird thing about those races is that there's also the strong possibility that those are the tracks where others are going to be strong as well, maybe unexpectedly so. And I think that really throws a spanner in the works. We could absolutely see weird circumstances where a wet Phillip Island sees Bagnaia and Martin crashing out, but there's then every chance that Johan Zarco is going to win the race on a Honda, not Marc Marquez or Enea Bastianini. Because the other thing is that as circumstances change, and if they do suddenly look like they're in a title fight, then they're also going to have to be the ones taking a little bit more caution and care, the way that, say, Martina and Bagnaia are. So it's catch-22 for those guys, even if they do somehow find a way back into something resembling title contention over the next 5 rounds.